Today we will learn how to operate the Full Spectrum Laser Cutter and Retina Engrave software. To start, you're going to want to look for the Retina Engrave application on your desktop. To find the application, it should look like a triangle with the words Retina Engrave 3D underneath it. Once you have opened it, it should take you to a screen that looks like this. We will begin by pulling over a project from Adobe Illustrator. Here we have a design for a keychain designed in Illustrator. To start things off, we're going to go up to the top, click on File, and Print like we normally would a document in Illustrator. But instead of going to a regular printer, we're going to click on the Full Spectrum Engineering driver. After choosing Full Spectrum Engineering driver, we're going to want to make sure the Ignore Artboard is turned on. Past that, we're going to click on Print. Now it'll be sending the information over to our Full Spectrum driver, at which point we see our design here, Dominic's truck, just like we saw it here on the Illustrator file. From this point forward, we're going to do all of our editing in Full Spectrum Retina Engrave software. There are two different ways of laser cutting. One is raster and one is vectoring. When you vector an image, that means that the laser cutter will follow the lines and designs in the actual file, just like you would trace an image. When raster or raster engrave is clicked on, it will follow the images just like a printer would print the object. So back and forth, it will begin to print out Dominic's truck. You'll use these in different settings. I would use a vector to cut a part out. So when I want to cut this image out or cut this keychain out, I would use vectoring on the outer edges or outer geometries and maybe this inner circle to make sure this part is cut out. Where it says Dominic's truck, I'm going to want to raster that image so that the image will then just be printed on the piece. The first thing we're going to want to do is raster the image. To raster the image, we're going to click on the Raster Engrave File tab. Once there, we'll look at the image to make sure it works on our screen, and then adjust our raster power, raster speed, and black and white thresholds. Each one of these has a unique setting. Raster power means how much power the laser is going to burn through the material. 100% means 100% the power of the laser. If I drop this down, I'll put this around 50, and it'll burn about halfway through the image. The next thing I'll look at is raster speed. This will be how fast the machine goes back and forth over this image. The slower the speed, the longer it'll take to raster the image. Finally, the last thing we'll do is the black and white threshold. So as I'm bringing this down, you can see the image gets lighter and lighter. It will also correspond to lighter and lighter wood burning on the actual material. I'm going to set this threshold to something that looks good for the design, which will be around 150. So let's go ahead and bring it up to around 200%. I am now ready to raster the image. To begin, each one of these icons represents an adjustment on the laser cutter. If I click on Home, that would be the first thing that I'm going to want to do. What this means is the machine will home its settings. It will go up to the top left-hand corner. From there, it'll recognize how many inches from the X and Y axis I am from that home position. It's a way of allowing the machine to coordinate itself. The next button is going to be my four corners. When I click on this button, each one of the four corners of this object will show up on the laser cutter. This will allow me to make sure that my material is within the parameters of this design. If I want a slower setting, I can click each one on this icon and it will slowly go from each layer and not all four corners at the same time. So I'll click this one, it will go to my right. Click it again, it will go to the bottom corner. Click it again to the next corner. Click it one more time and it will go back to the original position. The next icon is my positioning icon. The final icons are the play, pause, and stop. We'll use these icons now to create our keychain. To start the laser cutter, I will position the material in the laser cutter and be sure to position the cutter head in a location that matches to where I'd like this software to actually start cutting the material. Now that we have rastered an image onto our part, we're ready to cut the part out. The first thing I'm going to do is click over to Vector Cut. This tab will allow me to actually cut on the line each part. The next thing I'm going to look at doing is clicking on each line and adjusting the colors to a different setting. So this one I'm going to put as red, and for my circle I'm going to put as yellow. When I look over to my left-hand side, I'll see my vector layers. This gives me each layer and what the speed and the power setting for each color I have on my part. For instance, on the black, I don't want any of the image to actually be cut out. So I'm going to put 0 passes here. This will let the laser, when it comes to cut in, actually skip this part. There'll be no passes. When it goes to the red image, which is the outer geometries of the part, its order, the cut's going to be done first, my speed will be 100%, and my power will be at 100%. For this part, I'm going to want to slow the speed down. If it's at 100%, it won't have enough time to cut all the way through the material. For 1/8 inch plywood, I'm going to set 50%, and I'll monitor it to see how well it does. My orders now for red will be to cut first, its speed will be at 50%, and power at 100%. It'll do 1 pass. For my yellow line, I can do the same thing, so I'll set my speed at 50%. I can adjust this to a different speed setting of maybe 60 or let's do 55 speed, and that way we can just see a different time for each one. Finally, I'm ready to look at my settings and say my red will be cut out first, my yellow dot will be second, and my black will be left alone, so there'll be no order at all. I'm going to set my red setting actually I'm going to set my red setting to be done second. That way my order will be first all yellow, then all red, and finally it'll skip the black because I don't need that part cut out. With those 2 pieces cut, I should have my part completed. I am now ready to cut the part out. I will push the play button and watch the laser cutter work.